Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to the channel. On September 10th, we have UFC 279. The main event is Khamzat Chimaev versus Nate Diaz. And this card is a little under 6 weeks away. And looking over the announced fights so far for UFC 279, it's an absolute abomination. This is one of the worst cards on paper I've ever seen. And people keep saying, oh, we're not done filling out the fight card yet. We're 5.5 weeks away, so they're going to have to add at least a couple more notable fights soon, and I believe the UFC is purposely sabotaging UFC 279. I made a whole video about that. I will link it down in the description if you want to go check it out after this, but even with knowing that the UFC wants to intentionally make this card horrendous, I think this is too bad for even them. I think they're going to have to add at least 1 or 2 more notable fights to this card, so I wanted to make a video giving my possible options to save UFC 279. Obviously, not all of these are going to happen. There's no way all these fights get added to UFC 279, and this is pure speculation on my part, so who knows? None of these matchups could potentially happen, but I have a top 5 for UFC 279 of fights that I think would be really good to add to it, and the number 1 fight on the list is an amazing matchup that I think is the most probable matchup to be added as the co-main event of UFC 279, but I'm going to go from 5 to 1, and I actually have one honorable mention. And the reason this is an honorable mention is because this isn't really a big fight, but this could maybe open up the main card of UFC 279, and that honorable mention is Jack Della Maddalena versus Bryan Barberena. I think this fight makes perfect sense. I want to see Della Maddalena tested. He got a big win at UFC 275. Bryan Barberena is coming off that big win against Robbie Lawler, and I think you have Barberena, who's a veteran, you have Della Maddalena, who's just coming into the UFC, just got a big win, and I would love to see these two guys against each other, and that's a very tough matchup for Della Maddalena. Bryan Barberena is a guy that the UFC's counted out a couple times. They even put Sage Northcutt against him at one point, thinking they were going to build Sage Northcutt off of Barberena, and Barberena sent him back. So I would love this matchup, but again, I don't think this really makes UFC 279 that much better, and that's why I'm saying this is an honorable mention. The rest of the fights on the list are amazing matchups that I really want to see. So starting off with number 5 on the list is Jan Blachowicz versus Magomed Ankalaev. I don't know if this will work as far as the timeline. Jan Blachowicz fought in May, so I think he could probably fight in September, but Magomed Ankalaev just fought at UFC 277. Now, he didn't take any damage, but I don't know if he wants to make a quick turnaround, but if he does, this is the fight to make. If the UFC is going to do Jiri Prochazka versus Glover Teixeira 2 for the light heavyweight title, you look at the top 5, the only options for these guys are each other. And this fight makes perfect sense. You have Jan Blachowicz, who could have maybe made his claim as a number 1 contender, but he kind of got a weird win over Alexander Rakic, where Rakic blew his knee out, and we didn't get, like a statement win from Jan Blachowicz. And the same thing for Magomed Ankalaev happened at UFC 277. Now, he stopped Anthony Smith, but Anthony Smith broke his ankle in the middle of the fight. So neither one of these guys have that statement win where they can say, you know what, I'm fighting for the title next. And the UFC may go in the direction of Jiri Prochazka versus Glover Teixeira. Jiri Prochazka says he wants it. Glover Teixeira says he wants it. It's one of the best fights of the year, if not one of the greatest fights of all time that happened at UFC 275. And if they decide to go in that direction, what are these two guys going to sit out for another year while we wait for that to play out? I really don't think that makes sense. So book this as a number 1 contender fight, put it on UFC 279, and this could even be the co-main event of UFC 279, and I think fans would love it, and it wouldn't be massive by any means, but it would be much needed to the UFC 279 main card. Moving up on my list, number 4, Paddy Pimblett versus Jim Miller. The UFC and Paddy Pimblett himself has said, I'm not fighting in London anymore. I'm going to fight on a pay-per-view in Las Vegas. This makes perfect sense. Paddy Pimblett said, I don't want to fight in Madison Square Garden. I don't want the taxes from New York. And we need to see Paddy Pimblett test it. And I think Jim Miller makes the perfect sense. Jim Miller, he's a dangerous opponent. Jim Miller has, turned back a lot of upcoming prospects. And I would love to see Paddy Pimblett tested against Jim Miller. And I think, Paddy Pimblett, even though he hasn't really fought any super elite guys, the best competition he's fought is Jordan Levitt. He got that big win over Jordan Levitt where he was losing the fight in the first round, comes back and stops Jordan Levitt with a rear naked choke in the second round. People care about Paddy Pimblett's fights. You know, he had the viral post-fight speech in the octagon afterwards about suicide. And, you know, I just believe the UFC will want to get Paddy Pimblett on a big card. And while UFC 279 is terrible, there will be people who are going to tune in just to see Nate Diaz. Nate Diaz draws in some casuals. And if they add Paddy Pimblett to this card, it's not huge. I mean, I don't really think that should be a co-main event. Paddy Pimblett versus Jim Miller shouldn't be a co-main event. But this could be like a featured fight on the main card. And this, you know, if you're going to put Paddy Pimblett on the main card of a pay-per-view rather than on a UFC London Fight Night, he has to have a decent opponent. And I think Jim Miller is the perfect opponent for him. Because if Paddy Pimblett can get a win over a veteran like Jim Miller, he at least proves he belongs. There's a lot of doubters right now. And if he goes out there and maybe finishes a Jim Miller, he can prove that he belongs kind of towards that top 15 of the lightweight division. That's a bit of a stretch, but you get my point. And I think this will be a much needed addition to UFC 279. Moving up to number 3 on the list, I think this is a real possibility, and that is Tony Ferguson versus Dan Hooker. Who doesn't want to see Tony Ferguson fight? I mean, if you missed Tony Ferguson's prime, do yourself a favor and go back and watch Tony Ferguson's fights. And a lot of people have been speculating Tony Ferguson versus Dan Hooker makes a lot of sense. Both guys are on kind of losing streaks right now. Tony Ferguson's lost his last 4. He got KO'd by Michael Chandler brutally. He was winning the first round, but then he got front kicked in the face, really more like a punt, and he got brutally KO'd the first time we ever seen Tony Ferguson get finished. And Dan Hooker, I think, is on a 2-fight losing streak right now, but he's lost like 4 out of his last 5. He went down to featherweight. He got brutalized by Arnold Allen. He's moving up to lightweight. And I think this is a perfect matchup to get one of these guys back on track. One of these guys need a win. The UFC likes to book guys who are on losing streaks against each other to kind of, you know, put somebody back on track. And I think this fight makes a lot of sense for both guys. Dan Hooker recently called out Tony Ferguson, and there's no way this fight sucks. I mean, Dan Hooker's a relatively exciting fighter, and Tony Ferguson, the pressure that Tony Ferguson puts on guys, I get it. You know, he's got out-wrestled in a lot of his recent performances, and he got brutally KO'd by Michael Chandler. But Tony Ferguson is always an exciting fighter, and this is a fight that I would love to see on UFC 279. Moving up to number 2 on my list, and I don't know how likely this is to happen, but I think it's also a real possibility. I could be crazy. I've really heard no one possibly speculate about this, but that is Gilbert Burns versus Jorge Masvidal. And there is one reason that I think this is a real possibility, because if I'm the UFC, I think there's a possibility that Nate pulls out of this fight. I mean, they're doing this fight. It's vindictive matchmaking for the UFC because Nate Diaz won't re-up on his deal. So there's a chance I could totally see Nate Diaz like a week out from this fight saying, you know what, I got to pull out. I got an injury. I'm not fighting Khamzat. Because it's just a terrible matchup, and it's only because he won't re-sign. That's the reason they're giving an unranked Nate Diaz the number 3 guy in the welterweight division. And they're going to need a replacement. And what better than Gilbert Burns? That was one of the greatest fights of this year as well. Khamzat Chimaev versus Gilbert Burns. So if Nate Diaz were to pull out, they could put Gilbert Burns as a replacement for the main event and then the card, because imagine if the main event got canceled. This isn't even barely a fight night card as it stands right now. If Nate Diaz pulls out, I mean, this entire card's going to be canceled. So they would need a replacement. And Gilbert Burns versus Jorge Masvidal makes perfect sense. Gilbert Burns has been calling out Jorge Masvidal. Jorge Masvidal hasn't fought since UFC 272 against Colby Covington. He's on a losing streak. He needs to get back on track. I don't know. Jorge Masvidal ain't stepping in against Khamzat Chimaev. I find that really hard to believe. But Gilbert Burns definitely would, and I think Khamzat Chimaev would take that fight again. I mean, just one, and at least they would have a backup plan if Nate Diaz did pull out. But if everything goes forward, this is a great co-main event. I mean, Jorge Masvidal and Gilbert Burns is a great matchup. I think at least it's somewhat interesting. I know Jorge Masvidal has some grappling and wrestling deficiencies, and Gilbert Burns is very good. But I think this could still be a competitive fight. And Gilbert Burns said, you know what? I'm not even going to take you down in this fight. I want to strike against you. So who knows? Maybe he does that. Maybe Jorge Masvidal is able to pull it off. Gilbert Burns, got dropped by a jab in the Kamaru Usman fight. And this is 2 top 10 ranked welterweights in the division. This is a relevant fight, and I think this would be a much needed boost to UFC 279. And I think it's a real possibility just based on they're going to need a backup for the main event at UFC 279, because if that falls out, this is going to be an absolute catastrophe. This is going to be UFC 151 all over again, where the card would get canceled if they don't have a backup for the main event. So moving up to number 1 on the list, and this is the best fight on the list, and this is the fight that I think is most realistic, and I think this fight might actually get announced in the next week or so and be the co-main event for UFC 279, and that is Dustin Poirier versus Michael Chandler. This fight just makes perfect sense, and what an amazing matchup this would be. I mean, Dustin Poirier is coming off the loss to Charles Oliveira at UFC 269. Michael Chandler's coming off the win over Tony Ferguson, but before that, a loss to Charles Oliveira in a title fight as well. These guys have kind of been talking back and forth for quite a while, and who wouldn't love this matchup? I mean, there is no doubt in my mind that this would be a super exciting fight, and this would be a perfect co-main event. And not that it would be an ideal scenario, but if hypothetically the main event did get canceled, I think the UFC might be able to run a pay-per-view, still with Poirier versus Chandler as a main event. I mean, there wouldn't be a title on the line, but I think they could potentially still kind of get away with that. I mean, that's a bit of a stretch, but I think they still could. Bare minimum, they could change it to a fight night like they've done in the past when a big fight has fallen out on a terrible pay-per-view. I think they did it with Johnny Hendricks versus Wonderboy. I can't remember what the main event was supposed to be originally, but they changed it to a fight night. And God forbid Nate Diaz pulls out or Khamzat has to pull out. They could make this a fight night, and the main event would be Poirier versus Chandler. Poirier says he's down. Chandler says he's down. All the fans want to see this matchup. Neither guy is ever in a boring fight. Dustin Poirier, before the loss to Charles Oliveira, coming off 2 wins against Conor McGregor. Chandler coming off that spectacular front kick KO of Tony Ferguson. And, I mean, I would love to see this matchup. You know how exciting this fight would be? I mean, Michael Chandler has never been in a boring fight in his entire life, and neither is Poirier. Both guys are so well-rounded. I mean, I would kill to see Poirier versus Chandler. And regardless if it ends up on UFC 279 or not, I hope that they make this fight. I hope it's a fight night main event or a co-main event on another card, but I don't know where it would go because UFC 280 is too full right now. I mean, it's not going on that card, and that's in Abu Dhabi. So if they don't fight at UFC 279, because UFC 278 is too soon, it would have to happen in November, maybe at MSG or even in December. I think this fight is going to be announced this week. Dustin Poirier versus Michael Chandler at UFC 279. I think that's going to be it for notable fights on the card. I don't really think they're going to add 2 of these potential matchups. I think they're going to add 1 more decent fight and call it a day. And they're intentionally sabotaging UFC 279. I'll link the video down in the description. You can check it out if you want to see it after this video. But let me know what you guys think about all these potential matchups down in the comment. Don't forget to like the video, and thank you so much for watching.